So if I had 15 seconds to tell you something that I thought would be valuable, this is what I thought I'd tell you. Because I really believe it. Because it's happening. Because we've had now 20 years in California of medical cannabis usage. Turns out that our state has not fallen apart. It's better than ever. And to those who have concerns about how effective cannabis can be as in both medicinal or adult use contexts, 20 years of data overcomes pretty much all the resistance, because data doesn't lie. At which point people usually ask me this. So no, not currently. But I love what Salvador Dali said in response to this question when asked by a reporter, because he was so outlandish. His response was this, which which I thought was great. And of course, as it turns out, we all are. In that you can think of yourself as symbiotic communities of biochemical processes mediated by what outside the body would be considered drugs. And when I say symbiotic community, what I'm referring to is the fact that of the trillions of cells that make up what you're walking around with right now, about half are defined by your own DNA, and about half, based on the latest research, are outside of your DNA, meaning they are bacteria and yeast and other creatures that live either on the inside or the outside of your body with which you'd not be able to live. So we really are symbiotic communities, and these communities are mediated by communication, by information that's being exchanged around the community, and one can think of those information vehicles as drugs. So some of the drugs or hormones, as it were, that are of interest to us in this presentation are called endocannabinoids, meaning they are cannabinoids that you produce in your body, that all of us produce in our body. And they are part of a larger thing called the endocannabinoid system, which, believe it or not, it's a major part of all of our, not just our neurology, but the way that information is processed throughout our bodies, from our central nervous system to our immune system. It's a crucial part of that. There are multiple different types of receptors in this system. One is called the CB1, cannabinoid 1 receptor. One is called the CB2 receptor. If there's one thing that you can count on, there will be more receptors discovered every year. And the amazing thing is, because of the lack of research, at least up until recently, in cannabinoid science, we didn't know that we had an endocannabinoid system in our body until 1992. And as it turns out, it plays a major role in mediating communication in all systems in our body. And so, for instance, anandamide, the molecule on the top left of the screen, is named after the Sanskrit word ananda, which means bliss, and that it's thought to mediate feelings of satisfaction and happiness. And in fact, it does, because it interacts with dopamine, which is thought of as the reward neurotransmitter. It interacts with dopamine by suppressing the production of GABA, or actually the transmission of GABA, another neurotransmitter, which breaks down dopamine. So anandamide interacts directly with one of the most prevalent neurotransmitters in your brain by downregulating one of its antagonists. So it's obviously, and there are other endocannabinoids, probably the most well-known of which is 2-AG, which doesn't really have many binding sites in the central nervous system. However, it has tremendous number of binding sites, more than any other receptive binding site throughout your entire gut, in which it plays a major role in your immune system, in that your T cell production actually has binding sites for 2-AG. So without getting too deeply into endocannabinoids, we're all making them. They're all part of a complex network that is not isolated. It's part of a general system within the body that interacts with all other forms of message transport in the body. So as it turns out, there are plant cannabinoids as well. We discovered the plant cannabinoids before we discovered our own internal cannabinoids. But the reason that the plant cannabinoids work with us is because they're called phytomimemic, meaning that they are from the plant kingdom and they mimic the effects of cannabinoids that we produce internally. So for instance, people know THC, right? So THC is one of over 110 identified cannabinoids in the cannabis plant right now. It's only one, but it mimics the effect of anandamide when taken from an external source. Similarly, CBD, cannabidiol, which is maybe the other cannabinoid folks have heard about most frequently, mimics the effects of 2-AG. So one can think of ingesting those cannabinoids as basically replicating processes that you would do internally, but with an external stimulus. One thing that I'd like to pass on is that most cannabinoids don't get you high. The only cannabinoid that's been identified really strongly correlated with that feeling of euphoria is delta-9 THC, which is actually not even present in a cannabis plant that's growing. Delta-9 THC is a transitional product that happens after THC acid is heated to a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. So it actually, if you just eat some raw cannabis, you won't get high because it doesn't have any delta-9 THC. However, you could get a number of other benefits because you would be introducing cannabinoids which interact with your biology in various interesting ways through eating. So what do some of these plant cannabinoids do? There aren't just tens of studies anymore. There are thousands of studies worldwide that are changing on a daily basis. Some now that even have been replicated, which is obviously double-blind. Multiple replication is the standard for the real standard for how one would determine efficacy of a medicine, and that's happening now. It's happening. While it's not happening as much in the United States, it's starting to happen. The National Institutes of Health are opening up that road for the first time in really ever, which is very encouraging. But I also look to studies from Europe and especially Israel, which I think can be thought of as the world leader in cannabinoid research right now, as far as clinical trials in a population go. And so some of the things that they're finding specific cannabinoids are good for. CBD, really good for anti-anxiety. In fact, I use CBD not to get too stressed out about my business. In fact, it is my most oft-used cannabinoid. It's a really gentle anti-anxiety medication that doesn't have the rebound effect of benzodiazepams. And anyone who's used benzos for any length of time knows that there's like a strong rebound effect. CBD, when used in moderation, does not have any rebound effect. At least not that's been communicated in the literature. In addition to being strongly anti-anxiety, it's also correlated with being anti-depression, anti-spasmodic. I think folks now are aware of the use of CBD in anti-epileptic treatments. In fact, for which it's being studied in numerous countries. There's also THCA, which is the form of THC before it's converted into the psychoactive form, delta-9 THC. THCA is desirable on its own because it's anti-inflammatory. It is also an antioxidant. CBC is anti-tumor, antidepressant. CBN, it's a sedative, an appetite stimulator, a painkiller. Delta-9 THC is useful for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's disease, and potentially for cancer. Certainly already for cancer in terms of being an adjunct to a chemotherapy treatment that reduces the effects of nausea, like the symptomatic side effects of chemotherapy. But what is really intriguing is its use as actually an anti-cancer therapy, and that's something that is going to take a long time to validate, of course, but it is extremely encouraging. So does delta-9 THC get you high? No, actually delta-9 THC does not get you high. What gets you high is delta-9 THC deactivating GABA production or downregulating GABA production, which means that your dopamine doesn't get broken down as quickly by GABA because GABA breaks down dopamine or metabolizes dopamine, leads to the metabolization of dopamine, I should say. And what gets you high is more dopamine in your brain. That's the high you're feeling if you ever consume cannabis. There are maybe a few other things, but it's actually not from delta-9 THC. It is from more dopamine, the reward system. So when you are ingesting cannabis that has a delta-9 THC component, which is not all of them, it's important to state, you will feel a euphoric feeling of some level, largely because your body has more dopamine in it than it did before you ingested it. But that's not all. There are more things in cannabis that are really useful and affect our bodies. Probably foremost among them are terpenes. They come in various molecular forms, terpenoids, monoterpenes, sesquiterpenes, etc., which I'll just refer to the configurations of the molecules. And terpenes are present not just in cannabis, but in every plant. And one might recognize the terpene limonene as giving citrus its particular citrusy quality, limonene, lemon, etc. So you can just look down the list and see some of these things. What's interesting about terpenes is that they have proven effects on their own. So for instance, chamomile tea is proven to be a mild sedative, and the mild sedative actions actually largely come from the terpenes in chamomile tea, and the stimulant action of lemons being stimulating, or lemonade being stimulating, is because of limonene. Limonene is essentially a stimulant. But more than that, they actually interact with cannabinoids. So this leads to, so they're not just things that are isolated on their own, they're things that interact in a complex system called U. And the next slide, sorry, I'm going along with my notes as I'm looking at this. It describes what's called the entourage effect. The entourage effect is basically this. 1 + 1 = 3, as a simple example. Now, what does that mean? It means that the permutations or the interactions of multiple different molecules that you're taking into your body are greater than what you would get with a single molecule, which is sort of the antithesis of modern pharmaceutical production, right? Modern pharmaceutical production, as well as the statistical methods of determining their efficacy and safety, generally isolate the independent variable, right? So you're looking to isolate things so that you can identify a significant and reproducible effect with that one thing. So the math is easiest when you make it one thing. As it turns out, plant cannabinoids can work that way, but they work much better when they are used in conjunction with each other, meaning that there is a symphony of effects that happens called what has been dubbed the entourage effect when you consume them together. So it can be thought of as cannabis is really a biologic as opposed to a drug, a single pharmaceutical, and it's helpful to think about it as a biologic, because then one can wrap their head around the fact that you are taking in many things at one time, and by taking in many at one time, you get a much greater effect than you would if you isolated something. Specific example of this is the use of CBD as it's been applied to antispasmodic or anti-epileptic conditions. It's been found in numerous studies, with repeated studies, that CBD in an isolated form is not nearly as effective as CBD presented with the entire plant. Now, the mechanism of action has not been directly identified, but the data on whole plant versus isolated material is incontrovertible, and thus underlies the reason why an entourage effect is important. So how might one choose to take cannabis in? Vaporizing is a great way to do it. It's a great way to do it because it's fast. You notice the effects within 30 seconds to a minute, which gives it a great advantage over, for instance, ingesting it. Ingesting it can take 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending upon how much food is in your digestive system, and it can create such a lag time in noticing when the effects are working for you, that people will often eat a second dose or a third dose before the first ones even come on. That leads to what we in engineering call hysteresis, meaning like a feedback loop that gets larger, more and more out of control as it goes on, which is why all of us has had a friend or knows of a story of somebody who's eaten that brownie or one brownie too much, and then they're freaking out. That's largely because of the lack of speed and how quickly the effects are noticed, but also because of another factor. Because when you ingest cannabis, delta-9 THC is metabolized in your liver into a cannabinoid that is only ever present as a metabolic byproduct of ingestion of delta-9 THC that is 5 times more potent than delta-9 THC, because it's actually becomes a smaller molecule in your body, meaning that it has greater affinity to bind to the CB1 receptor site. As you can tell, I have a lot of feelings of caution around ingesting of cannabis, eating cannabis. I think that eating cannabis is likely not to be it's likely not to be useful in the context of adult or recreational use. It's likely to be useful in a very controlled, more rigorous medical methodology, in that you can get a lot more cannabinoid into your body by ingesting it than you can by vaporizing, but it is not nearly as applicable to the broad population. So vaporizing is, however, because it's super fast. Vaporizing, by the way, for those who might not know, is heating a substance up to the point when the desirable products in that substance vaporize, become aerosolized, and thus can be inhaled without reaching a point of combustion. And that's an important difference between smoking, obviously, because smoking is obviously hotter, but when you're smoking, you're actually inhaling combustion byproducts like benzenes or fluorocarbons or a number of things which are inherently toxic on their own. So you're getting a system level toxin, and it doesn't matter if it's cannabis or if it's tobacco or whatever. When you're burning stuff, you produce secondary byproducts. And the second effect of smoking is that you actually, when you're inhaling smoke, you're actually inhaling, if you look at it under a microscope, you're inhaling tiny hot burning coals into your trachea and upper lungs. And those create scarification over time. And literally you essentially build up scar tissue around that area because you're smoking stuff that are essentially little tiny hot coals. Vaporizing, however, doesn't do this. For instance, our vaporizer has heating control, and you can heat it anywhere between 100 Celsius and about 250 Celsius, depending upon the substance. You can keep it basically well below any temperature that would promote combustion. Also, it's interesting to note that this is my personal feeling that vaporization, because when you see this doesn't look like this doesn't carry all the stigma of the hippie at Woodstock smoking the joint and being out of control and smoking this dirty thing that has all this connotation with it. This actually looks like technology, and it's helped to change the way that people interpret what's in it, because they're looking at it now as technology, which we think of it inherently as something that we can control and have more sort of agency over than this sort of burning, rebellious plant, right? This isn't rebellious. This is using technology to administer something in a more specific and effective way. So we're fortunate that a lot of people think that we make the best vaporizer in the world. Now, I didn't come right out. I thought about this. I didn't come right out and say we make the best vaporizer in the world, because anyone who ever says that on anything is going to maybe be partially right and maybe be partially wrong. So I can say, however, with assurance that many people do think that we make the best in the world. What do I think would make it the best for any of our customers or anyone? It's that it can profoundly change your relationship with the plant. And here's how. It can profoundly change how you interact with the plant because it gives you the ability to microdose. And microdosing is the key to successful administration of cannabis, in my opinion. A microdose is a small dose, let's call it the smallest perceptible dose that has an effectiveness, because so many people have had a negative experience with cannabis because they think back to, that one time I tried the bong rip in my buddy's college room, or I had that big puff off the joint, or 3 puffs, or whatever it was, and then I coughed my brains out, and then I was super anxious, and then I wanted to eat a bag of corn chips, right? So the reason for that is because most people dose themselves too much when they had their first cannabis experience, because there wasn't a means of effective dosing, right? I mean, if you just have this big thing that you're taking some giant volume of smoke in from, you don't really have any ability to dose yourself. And the difference between a medicine and a poison is one thing: the dose. So an effective cannabis product allows you to dose it. You can do that by having a small amount in whatever you're using to administer, or you can do it by employing the model of vaporization that we developed for this. And if you don't mind, I'll show you right now how to do it. So to use a Firefly and to microdose yourself, all you do is touch it on the side, count to 3, that was about 3, and then inhale for about 7 seconds. By the way, that was completely legal in Austria. I want to make sure that everyone knows that what I just vaped there was something I brought over for demo purposes. It's CBD isolate, which is completely legal in Austria and most of Europe, suspended in glycerin. Not a product that I have, it's just like a little thing I take around to demo because it's easy to transport across borders. But what you just saw was what I would call a microdose. I could have stopped at 2 seconds instead of 7 seconds. So the amount of control that I had in that is tremendous compared to what preceded it. Also, because the Firefly only heats up when you're inhaling. Like literally, you only heat your material as you're inhaling hot air through it because of our convection heating technology, which I can go into detail on with anyone who wants to talk to me after this presentation. It means that you don't feel, this is a very subtle psychological thing, it means you don't feel compelled to vape a whole bowl or smoke a whole bowl, which can lead to an overdose, lead to too much. I don't mean overdose in that you're going to be dead, but overdose in that you don't feel the way you want to feel. Approaching it one puff at a time, where you have complete control over that puff, is such a more effective way to ingest cannabis because you can stop short of something that's going to get you into trouble. And that's been a major part, actually, of the successful propagation of cannabis use in society, I think, is greater control over its administration. So we've really focused on that. That was a major part of what we had our minds on when we were developing Firefly. So just to talk a little bit more about that. So we had to develop a whole new heating technology that pumps a ton of amps through a resistive coil so it can heat up in 3 seconds. So you can actually approach it like, no, now I'm going to have a puff, put it down, it's not heating anymore. Maybe I'll come back a half an hour if that last business call got me a little anxious. Have one small puff, level out a little bit, put it down. It basically, the heating technology was designed to enable microdosing. So you can think of each toke as a separate session. And I would encourage everyone here to everyone here who's interested in cannabis, who maybe might use it in their personal life or know somebody who does, to put out that philosophy into the world of microdosing, of taking the smallest possible amount, and then going from there. But wait until you notice an effect, and then you can ramp it up to the level that you're comfortable with. That's just that dissemination of knowledge that we can all assist with in society is so helpful with getting people to the point where they're going to have positive and repeatable experiences. And of course, we can control the temperature in the Firefly, which we do through an app. I'm just about to launch an app update. I'm very excited about it because it gives you tremendous amount of control of the temperature with very fine specificity. Because the temperature, here's why that's important. Obviously, staying below combustion temperatures is important, but also cannabinoids and terpenes, as it turns out, don't all vaporize at the same temperature. They vaporize at a bunch of different temperatures. They're not a monolithic thing. And by having fine-grained temperature control, it gives you the ability to vaporize at different temperature settings, which correspond to the vaporization points of different cannabinoids that you might want to use for different purposes. Okay, so that was some cannabis talk and some general cannabis talk. I want to pivot right now and talk a little bit about the company, why I'm doing this, a little bit about the journey, because as like a business conference, you as other business folks might be interested in this. So, so why the name Firefly and why this logo and why anything? So why don't I... So when one looks at this logo upside down, and adds a little color, one gets the idea of what we're actually going for with Firefly. That was an indica leaf, by the way, not sativa. But really, when it gets right down, why Why did we call it Firefly? Well, first of all, because when you press it, it glows like a firefly. But more so because we wanted to communicate that feeling of fireflies. I know that there are fireflies in Austria and Germany, well, throughout Europe, throughout America. I've got incredible, wonderful memories as a child of chasing fireflies. And there's that magical time when you're up a little later than you would normally be up, right? Your parents are letting you stay up because it's summer and you're getting to run around. So there's this magical feeling of getting to do something that you normally don't get to do. That's special. And that's magical because you see little lights blinking in space. How magical is that? It's incredible. And they're easy to catch. There's nothing about fireflies that's hard. Everything is easy. So I was hoping, and my grand aspiration was to communicate some of that feeling that I have about fireflies. So fireflies make people smile, and really, I want to make people smile with my business. I've done lots of businesses where the results of my efforts did not make people smile, and so I want to make people smile. It's a great, simple measure. And as it turns out, big bags of cannabis make people smile too. This is, now I don't know if the animation's working. Let me just double check this. Oh yeah, it does. Big bag. So this is from Harold and Kumar go to White Castle, and he finds a big bag of weed on the sheriff's office counter, and then he has a whole teenage fantasy about how great it is to have this big bag of weed. And there is a little bit of that delight. This is me at my home. My mission is to share my personal experience with the world. I've had a 30-year relationship with cannabis that has been almost entirely positive. Much more positive than any relationship I've ever had with alcohol, for instance, or frankly, for that matter, any other substance that induces a consciousness alteration. It's been a profoundly positive force in my life. I've never had an abuse problem. I mean, I do too much engineering to use it too much. I use high CBD cannabises mostly. It's never been a problem, and I want to share that possible relationship with the world. That's sort of why I'm in business, is because it is possible with the right dosing strategy, the right tools, to have a tremendously successful relationship with cannabis. And I like the lifestyle of actually making things. This is me at our factory in China. I'm very proud, obviously. And I actually love to go to the factories. I love working in China. It's incredibly stimulating to work in a place where anything in the world is made within a 100-kilometer radius, and you can have it delivered to your factory in like 2 days if you've got the right relationship with your sub-supplier. That's an incredible feeling of creative potential, right, that you have there. Plus, there's something about how American and Chinese psyches can meld to produce a best, to produce something that's better than anything individually, that I'm still teasing apart, but has been a really enlightening part of the journey. So our goal with the Firefly is to make smiles. It's really simple. That said, I don't mean for that to sound too flip, because my attitude is anything but that. We hold our principles very deeply and strongly, and those start with safety. The first principle that we have starting this business is safety. So for instance, which is why we have an approach of microdosing, because that's user safety in terms of consumption of any material. One thing. But it extends into every aspect of our engineering. So for instance, all the surfaces that along the vapor path in the Firefly are FDA food grade compliant, meaning that they are super clean, they don't degrade, and they are tested to a very high standard of being biologically compatible. So we're not introducing things that would get into the vapor path that you wouldn't want. Another thing is in battery engineering. We actually engineered our own battery because we had very specific performance requirements, and in I think 250,000 batteries that we've sold so far, we have had 0 failures of the battery. They degrade and they don't work after a while, but 0 catastrophic things where, like the battery with lithium-ion batteries, they can explode, etc. We've had 0 of those, and it's not by accident. It's because we engineered 3 redundant firmware systems of making sure that the battery would never go into an overload mode, and one final mechanical thing that was like it would fail in the off position. So we're very, very dedicated to product safety in every respect. But the other principles are, well, safety is the most important. The other principles we also hold very dearly, and this is a personal thing. I believe in cognitive liberty. I believe that all of us, and only us, only you yourself, have the ability to decide what your conscious experience is. Nobody else has that ability to make that decision for you. Of course, thus, being a somewhat completely a social libertarian, I believe that you should be able to put anything into your body that you want to put into it. And then the flip side of that cognitive liberty is personal responsibility. Because you can put anything into your body and then have the effects of whatever that might be. And if you get behind the wheel and then all of a sudden endanger the rest of us, then you have violated your contract of personal responsibility with the rest of society. So the two have to be balanced. I keep that in mind as I'm developing every product. So for instance, there are many suggestions to Firefly to develop a dabbing product, right? Where you take a big dab of extract, put it on something, and you sort of, it's a 21st century bong. I also believe that it leads to creating an endocannabinoid system that will become out of balance over time. And I absolutely will never make a product like that. So there's no way I'm going to make a dabbing product, because I believe it leads to patterns of abuse. And so cognitive liberty balanced with personal responsibility. Finally, innovation. That's actually what gets me excited every day, is innovating. Figuring something out that I've never figured out before. That challenge of a new mountain to climb with every little technical thing, and then now as I've learned to operate a business, with every little business thing. The challenge to continue to innovate is what gets me up every day, because it's like going to a candy store every day. It's so darn fulfilling to get a chance to innovate, because you just get a chance to take a crack at what kind of creative thing can you put out there in the world, and then you get your feedback that sometimes those ideas work and sometimes they don't. But the process itself is really fun. I truly love it. So our mission, a simple mission, is that we combine the most advanced vaporizer hardware with, in the very near future, engineered consumables. And the implication of that is, yes, we are going to get into the cannabis business directly, well, or indirectly, but we will be co-developing hardware with the consumables, because that's how you can create the most control around any effect. So join if you'd like to. In fact, I'd love to have the opportunity to California, but wait, we're not done. And then before we go to questions, oh good, we're right on time. There's about 5 minutes for questions, but the last slide, I wanted to take this opportunity because, you know, I don't often get, well, I speak to plenty of people, but of course, there's thank you to the audience. Thank you for giving me your time, your valuable time. I really appreciate it. I hope I've communicated something of value to you. And just in case there's an opportunity to communicate a little bit more value, I wanted to show you this slide. I wanted to say thank you to people who inspire me, who maybe you would be interested to know about. And you can do your own research. Now, by the way, if anybody knows who these 6 people are, who's in the audience right now, I think that you and I would be really good friends. So it's an invitation to come up. If you know one of these people, I think we'd have something very interesting to talk about. Really quickly, who are these people and why am I showing them to you? And why am I saying thank you to them? So the first one on the top left is Maria Sabina. She was a Mazateca curandera, which means a healer, a curer, in Mexico, who introduced psilocybin mushrooms to the West through a gentleman named Gordon Wasson. They have a multi-thousand year of use of psilocybin for directed healing experiences. She introduced it to the West, and my God, and this was only in the 40s and 50s, and we have so much to be thankful to her for. The man in the center is Raphael Mechoulam. He is an Israeli researcher who was the first person to isolate THC in the early 60s. His lab has been active for 50 years and has been at the leading edge of discovering new cannabinoids and contributing greatly to identification and the around the mechanisms of action of the endocannabinoid system. He is a he is the titan, I think, right now in the cannabis field. And so anybody in cannabis should thank that this wonderful man who is coming from such a great place, who is currently involved with major research projects in Israel with veterans who are using cannabis, state-licensed cannabis, to combat PTSD. And his lab is involved in those things as well as more fundamental research. The man on the top right is named Richard Schultes. Richard Schultes is an ethnobotanist who brought the awareness of the traditions of ayahuasca from South America to the Western world. If you know anything about ayahuasca and that healing tradition, we have, of course, the great lineage of shamans to thank for that. But in terms of that bridge between that culture and the West, Richard Schultes is who we have to thank. So I wanted to thank Richard. The bottom left are the Shulgins, Sasha and Ann Shulgin. Sasha Shulgin pioneered a lot of what are called consciousness research chemicals, developing analogs to MDMA and other substances. He wrote 2 amazing books called Pikal and Tikal. If anyone's interested, you can look into those. The person in the center is Terence McKenna. And if you ever want to listen to a podcast that will blow your mind, listen to some of Terence McKenna's talks that are available freely throughout the internet. And my God, the man, he was called the Bard, as in Shakespeare, because he was so eloquently loquacious about his experiences going pretty far in terms of altered states of consciousness and coming back and trying to share those radical experiences with the rest of the world. And particularly his work around DMT is notable and is, I think, in future years we'll look back and realize how fundamental a thing that is to human consciousness when we're a little bit more grown up. And then finally, I wanted to thank Albert Hofmann in the bottom right. Albert Hofmann synthesized LSD and opened up, and because he was a Westerner and started a whole new thing, helped to create radical changes in consciousness that are the waves of which are still being felt today. It remains an amazing potential molecule for both personal exploration, but also more pragmatic and simple things like enhanced productivity. I don't know if anyone has read news about lots of people in Silicon Valley, lots of people, who knows how many that is, but are doing what I said earlier, microdosing LSD. In fact, I've done it myself. You microdose way under the threshold of any dose that would give you a psychedelic effect, but you notice other effects like greater focus, slight stimulation, an easier ability to connect apparently disparate ideas, because you get a little bit less sort of single track and you can become a little bit more associative. This is in microdosing form, meaning that an effective dose being about 100 micrograms of LSD, a microdose being anywhere from 1 to 20 micrograms of LSD. I've used 5, between 1 and 5, like tiny amounts for like, let's say 3 days at a time, and have noticed really interesting things around enhanced focus and creativity. So I wanted to say thank you to those people. I'd encourage you all to look into them. They are people of really high character as you get to know them, who have done a lot for our society and done a lot for our ability to think the way that we want to think, and expand our capabilities of what we thought could actually be. So that's my presentation. Oh gosh, I just have a little time. Maybe the folks in the back will give me some time, but if anyone has any questions, I want to say thank you and ask any questions that you have.